Okay, welcome back for part 3 of the agonizing prayer. Now, we talked before about, in our part 1 and part 2, about Luke 22, verses 39 through 46. We went off on Mark 14, 32 through 35 and learned more in a parallel passage. And now we're back to our main passage of Luke chapter 22. I want to pick up again in verse 41. So Luke 22:41, I'm going to read this from the Concordant Literal Version. It says, "And he is pulled away from them about a stone's throw, and kneeling, he prayed." So Jesus, we know the story here. It's Jesus going to pray just outside of the Garden of Gethsemane. And so he was pulled away from them. The Spirit of the Lord was pulling him away by necessity, saying, we need to spend some time together for you to endure what is coming. And you need to be tested again. So the Spirit pulled him away from the apostles about a stone's throw, which we talked about is about 50 feet. Now, it's interesting. We see in parallel passages of Mark 14:35, Matthew 26:39 also, that he did not come up and just gently kneel. It says here that he came up and kneeling, he began to pray. Or as Rotherham's puts it, he came up and bending his knees began to pray. That's not what happened. It's interesting, in this passage in Luke, even the King James says that he came up and he bent his knees, or he knelt down, as the NES says it, and began to pray. It's not what he did. We look in the parallel passages. It was a lot more brutal than that. He came up and he fell to the ground on his knees. Now this is hard-packed and rocky soil. Can you imagine coming up? And you're not a heavy man, there's not a lot of flesh there anyway, and just fall on your knees on rocks. He came up and it was so heavy upon him, he felt such amazement and dread, he just fell on his knees. He walked as far as he could walk and then fell on his knees. The pain did not matter. The pain didn't matter anymore. He fell to his knees. He didn't just kneel. He didn't gently get down and put his robe down as the movies show. He folds his robe up and puts under his knees because he's on rocky ground. He fell on those rocks. The flesh didn't matter anymore. It was his spirit. I hear it all the time. I hear people say, all that Jesus suffered for us, which is true, it was all in the flesh. No, it wasn't. His flesh didn't matter. Yes, he did suffer in the flesh, but that's not what was driving him. That's not what hurt so bad. It was the things happening in the spirit. He fell on his knees. He didn't notice. Didn't matter. I know if I do that and I fall on my knees, I'm going to have some cut flesh. Because you look at the rocks. Paul was there. He can tell you, there's hardly one rock you can find that's nice and round and smooth. They're jagged rocks. You get round, smooth rocks when you get a lot of weathering going on. A lot of rain, a lot of snow, a lot of freezing. You don't get that there. Those are jagged rocks. He's going to be cut up when he fell on those rocks. Wow. His flesh didn't matter anymore. Can you imagine spiritual pain that strong where you're not aware of your flesh? What Jesus endured, he endured a lot more than any man ever endured in the flesh. You know, I saw it was a book about the heroes of World War II, and it showed a man, they don't really understand it, but his ship was torpedoed. And this pilot stayed at the helm of this civilian tanker while his ship burned. And it was full of oil, fuel oil. And the whole ship burned until the fire raged back, but it didn't sink. And all the men got off, and the pilot kept the ship going straight ahead. And they heard him screaming in the cabin, which was made of wood, as the cabin became engulfed in flame, and the ship kept going steady on its course. And he had the wheel, and he'd never let it turn course. And a few days later, they were able to get back on board that ship and finish taking it on emergency. They towed it to England, and it never fully sank. And that man's skeletal remains was still standing there, holding on to that wheel. What he endured was incredible. But what Jesus endured was far more. It was far worse. Far worse than even that. Thank God, though, for brave Americans that sacrificed it all like that sailor did. That's why they call it the greatest generation. Verse 42, it says, reading from the CLV, the Concordant Literal Version, so he fell on his knees and he prayed, saying, Father, if it is thy intention, carry aside this cup from me. However, not my will, but thine be done. If it is thy intention, look at how others rendered this verse. Here's the King James, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. That always haunted me. Now, you're the Father of Christ, and Jesus said, if you're willing, take this cup from me. Why aren't you willing? As a kid, I would say that. I would wonder that. Why aren't you willing? What kind of God is this? That he's not willing to save his own son. Why aren't you willing? Jesus said if you're willing, you could. You see, there's a subtle twist there. Makes God out to be an ogre. Makes God out to be something wicked. That's not what was said. Let's see what the modern King James says. The same thing. They haven't changed it, even though they know better. How about Young's? Young says, if thou be counseling to make this cup pass from me. Counseling? Now, here's the heart of the word. Father, if it is thy intention. What did God intend to do? In other words, it's already written. It's already done. It was done before the creation began. It was already determined millions of years ago. It was already said and done. Jesus is the center of the Logos, or the plan of God, because the success of the entire plan of God is Jesus. So the intention of God is what? To follow the Logos. God's intention is to follow the Logos. If it's your intention, carry aside this cup from me. So he's saying, is it in the Logos somewhere? Is it your intention? Is it part of the Logos? Is there something I'm missing? See, at this point, Jesus was beginning to lose light. Otherwise, why even pray that? Why even say that? At this point, he was beginning to lose light. He hurt so bad already. Remember what we looked at last week. It actually said that Jesus was amazed exceedingly as he walked away from the apostles. The 3 apostles he left a stone's throw away from the 8. He was amazed exceedingly. It was far worse than he ever imagined. It was so bad to walk away that he was walking into a wall of darkness, and all of a sudden the mind becomes confused. He's a man. Have you ever been so astonished or so afraid that you become confused? Oh, yeah. So his mind begins to become confused, but he obeys. He was pulled, it says in verse 41, away from them, a stone's throw, falling on his knees, cutting his flesh. But he didn't even notice. He's confused and he's amazed. And he's just, what is your intention, Lord? If it's your intention, then carry this aside from me, because I can't imagine doing this. He couldn't remember. All he could go by is obeying the Spirit of the Lord. He obeyed. He couldn't remember why. He obeyed, but he didn't know why he was doing it. You see, that's what the Lord requires of us, is submission. Submission to his will and to his word. If you say, I'll submit if I can figure it out, then you've already lost. You've already lost. The devil's got you. Because the devil can test you and put you in the fire so hot you can't think anymore. You've been there. We've tasted of that, at least to a degree. You get so beat up, you can't think. You can't think straight. And that's where he was. Isn't that amazing? If it's your intention, carry aside this cup from me. However, not my will, but thine be done. He didn't just passively say this. He's crying it out. He's crying it, weeping. Then verse 43. I'm going to read that in the CLV also. Now a messenger was from heaven was seen by him, strengthening him. So the 3 apostles, they see him right over there. They saw him fall to his knees. They see him laid back like this. He's not sitting there with a nice Catholic prayer. He's crying out and, oh God. And then they see all of a sudden there's somebody right behind him. Somebody right behind him with his hand on his shoulder. Glowing. You can kind of see through him a little bit. Glowing. And they're sitting there, Peter, James, and John, and they're going, oh, wow, look at that. In his agony, an angel is there. Peter, James, and John saw the angel ministering to Jesus. Then a curious thing. Verse 44, I'm actually going to go back to NAS to read verse 44. And Rotherham's, they say it together the same way. It says, and being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling upon the ground. Well, it's getting worse. Let's read Rotherham's. Was it Rotherham's? 42. Hang on just a moment. Okay, I'm going to just stay with NES. It says, being in agony. Others say he came to be in a struggle. Well, the word struggle there is not a very good rendering of it. It's literally being in agony. The word here, Strong's number 74, agonia, we get the word agony from it. The English equivalent is agony. He was in absolute agony in this prayer. It is the agony as though the struggle were a wrestling match and every muscle in your entire body is being used to try to overcome your opponent. I can relate to this. I used to wrestle in high school, and I had two older brothers, so I was already trained up before I ever went out for wrestling. But I know what that means. I mean, you're in such agony, even your toes are tense and pushing. Your whole body, your whole being is involved in this struggle. He agonized in this struggle. Why? It's interesting. It says he was praying very fervently. But it's in Rotherham's, I'm not sure why this version is different than my version at home. Interesting. In Rotherham's, it puts it this way. Let's see if King James. All right, King James actually isn't bad here. It says, and being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly. Well, he didn't just pray more earnestly. He prayed fervently. He prayed more fervently. So what is it actually telling us? It's saying when the angel appeared and strengthened him, his prayer became agonizing. And he prayed harder. He prayed more fervently. Why did his prayer become more agonizing? Why did his prayer become more agonizing? I mean, the angel's right there with his hand on his back, praying for him and strengthening him. Why did his prayer become more agonizing? It's because the angel being there gave him his answer. He was asking the Father, if it's according to your intention and the Logos, let this cup pass from me. He couldn't remember. Well, the angel there touching his back, he felt the angel there. He felt strength come into his body. He realized, okay, now that strength is coming to me, I can think again. And I see your intention is I have to go through this all the way. I have to be separated from you all the way. That's what threw him into agony. And that's why he prayed more fervently. The angel strengthening him threw him into agony because he got his answer from God. The answer was, I'm going to strengthen you, but you're going all the way. You're going to go through this all the way. He agonized in prayer because he got his answer. His answer was, you got to go all the way through it. Jesus began at that point, he began to die. He actually began to die. When the small capillaries of his face began bursting, he was having a massive heart attack. The stress physically was so great, his heart was expanding, pumping super fast, pop, 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 pop. As he sweated in this prayer, sweat and blood mixed starts dripping out of his beard because the small capillaries are bursting. That's how much agony that he was in. Okay, we will pick up with verse 45 on part 4.